There we go. Wonderful. Okay, welcome everybody. We're glad that you're here. Can't believe this is the third week already. Gosh, next week's our last time together. And we've got a full house here, so let's get started. Hopefully you received the handouts. We're going to send you a link again to the site on Trinity Cathedral website where all these handouts are from the entire 4-week course. So in case you missed one, you can go back there and catch it. And also I'm to mention to you that the recordings for this class, in case you missed one or want to watch it again, are on the YouTube channel for Trinity Cathedral, Portland. And so you would go to YouTube, you would go to search, and you type in Trinity Cath, C-A-T-H, PDX, Portland. And then all of these recordings will show up there in case you'd like to access them. Okay, so here we go. Deeper into this Enneagram as mirror to the soul. And this week, I would like to start with a story. Because when we talk about one of the spiritual, mystical origins of the Enneagram, one of the groups that had a particularly profound influence on this tool are the Sufis. The Sufis, again, are that mystical branch of Islam who tried really hard to hold in sacred tension the truth of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, and saw the common ground between them. And they often would use story to explain their essential teaching. And this is a great story that also explains the nature of the Enneagram. So it's called the tinsmith. Sometimes it's called the story of the imprisoned tinsmith. So here we go. And if you're just coming on again, please make sure you mute your microphones and your cameras, please. So once upon a time, in a city far away and in a time long ago, a tinsmith was falsely accused of a crime that he did not commit. Being poor and without any powerful friends to influence the judge, the tinsmith was imprisoned. He was given a wish before being sent to the cells, and he asked that he be allowed to receive a rug which would be woven by his wife. And in due course, a small rug was made and delivered to the prison, and upon receiving it, the tinsmith would prostrate himself upon the rug 5 times a day, every day, to say his prayers. After some time, the tinsmith said to his jailers, "Can you not see, my friends, I am poor and without hope, and you are wretchedly paid. But I am a tinsmith, and if you would bring me some tin and some tools to work with, I shall make some small artifacts which you and your families could sell in the market, and we would both benefit." So the guards agreed, and presently they and the tinsmith were both making a small profit, from which they brought food and comfort for themselves and their families. One day, when the guards awoke, they found the cell door was open and the tinsmith was gone. As the word moved around town, some spoke of magic or perhaps a miracle, because no prison in this kingdom had ever been breached. The governor of the province heard of the story of the tinsmith's escape and summoned him to his palace. The governor asked what magic he had used or special prayer to make such an impossible escape. The tinsmith replied, "Oh, you see, it's very simple. My wife is a carpet weaver. She designs rugs and carpets and mats, and she weaves beautiful patterns into the warp and woof of the fabric. By design, she found the man who had made the locks of the cell and found by him the design and wove that design into the spot where my head touched in prayer 5 times a day. Now, I am a metal worker, and this design to me looked like the inside of a lock. But I lacked the materials to make a key. So I made a business proposition to the guards by design, and I used their humble materials to make small artifacts, including a key that would eventually unlock the cell door. And so by design, I escaped. So you see, we are all born with a brain, said the tinsmith. When we begin to understand the patterns and the structure of our thinking, we can start to liberate ourselves from the enslavement of our limitations. So there you have a marvelous story. And in some ways, having just shared that Sufi story with you, you have really, in a simple way, the entire lesson that I want to share with you for the day. So instead of trying to overly explain it, I'll just let that story sit there. We've been exploring the holy idea of your soul. And I told you that this tool that we call the Enneagram now has been called in the 20th century one of the world's great sacred psychologies, meaning a tool that would put together the study of the psyche and the study of the sacred. As such, the Enneagram is really a map and an experience. Our personality is made up of our egoic experiences. We have to distinguish between a person, who we are, and in our essence, and our personality. In our essential self, every one of us is perfect and flawless and fearless and loving. And there's no conflict between our head and our heart and our gut. But what begins to happen is as the personality eventually accumulates and warps our view of our essential self, we begin to lose our essence and we move into trusting the ego more than we do our spiritual or non-conditioned self. I think I might have mentioned before in an earlier class that when the question is asked about whether our Enneatype is nature or nurture, the response to that question that I really prefer is that it's 1/3 nature, 1/3 nurture, 1/3 choice. So what I love about the Enneagram is it gets us out of the need psychologically sometimes to blame our father wound or our mother wound, to endlessly try to fix ourselves by going back to our wounds. And instead, it says, no, there's a part of this personality self that we chose early on to survive, and that's not all bad. Now, the thing is with the Enneagram, and this is why I think it's such an ingenious tool, rather than seeing the personality as one thing and our spiritual self as another thing, there is an absolute connection between personality and soul or essence. And this essential part, and we've used that term a lot here, to understand soul child, we'll keep using that term essence. It's that untouchable, untouched part of ourselves before anything was done to us or we've done anything to anybody else. In a way, it's our soul self. It's always there. It's always there. It's just that we forget it. We need to remember it, to reconnect to it. So this essential self, this self that connects us to our divine origin, that connects us to our creator, connects us to God, is corresponding to that part of ourselves before we become distorted. Now, all of that is kind of the basic foundation of this last sort of part of the puzzle that I want to talk to you about today that makes the soul child concept make more sense, I think. And that's what Almas calls the Enneagram of holy ideas. I've kind of referred to that a bit already when I've referred to Maitreyi's work and so forth. But tonight, what I want to do is really lift this piece up. And then what we're going to do next week. So again, don't worry. Don't be concerned that, gosh, I forgot how this term fits with that term. I hope that what I can do next week then is take all of these concepts and put them together for you so that you don't have to think too hard. They'll be a natural part of your Enneagram vocabulary. Now, this is one slide that I did add before I sent you your PowerPoints today, because I was trying to think of how I could describe this holy idea. So I will follow up and send this slide to you. The holy idea is an innate, essential quality of our human mind. It's innate. It's not something we go out and make happen. The personality we make happen, but not the holy idea. That resides in us in an essential kind of way. The holy idea is also an experience of the human heart when we abide in presence, when we can rest in that essential self, that part of us that is connected to the divine. And we do that when we are present and conscious and aware. Then in our heart space, we really just instantly drop into this wonderful guide in our lives, this North Star called the holy idea. But as our personality falls into trance, which is part of the incarnational human reality, we begin to lose our soul's identity. So you see in that little definition there, mind, heart, and embodiment. And you need all three. Those are the three legs of the tripod that we need to be a human being. And therefore, to understand the holy idea, as we fall deeper into the trance of ego fixation. I love that. That's Oscar Ichazo's language and definition, one of the early Enneagram psychologists and writers. We fall into a trance. We just start operating out of mechanical mind. We start doing things. We fall into traps, not even consciously. The trap is there as a way to sort of, it was a crutch that we used early in life to figure out how to survive in the world. But what it does is it keeps us in ego fixation. The more we do that, and we lose sight of our essential self, we lose contact with that soul self, and the holy idea itself becomes distorted. So that for some people, when they first discover the holy idea, which I hope you'll do tonight, of your type, because this is often not a concept that's taught in a lot of Enneagram courses. And again, what I'm doing here is really lifting up the spiritual tradition of the Enneagram. This holy idea to me is the part that locks it all together. I want to know what this is because it gives me, in a way, my spiritual DNA. This is what I am meant to live into. So, Maitreyi, who's a disciple of Alma's, says, each of us is a unique manifestation of being. And as we experience the essence of who we are, and that's 7 billion of us on the planet, the constructs of our personality dissolve, soften, and being is experienced. Being would be, in this vocabulary, another way of describing God, or the ultimate being, is experienced through our individual soul. None of us is the totality of being. So the whole point of this soul child stuff is so that I might, through exercises and spiritual practices, maybe start reconnecting to my essential self for the first time in decades. And then I can be guaranteed that without going and attacking my personality or trying to say, how am I going to get that personality not to have such a tight grip on my actions and my addictions, it starts to dissolve. The grip starts to loosen. And I begin to experience being more directly, God, the divine, the other more directly, through my spark of the divine, which is my soul. So just a couple of terms here. We're talking about being here as the true nature of everything, the ultimate reality. We could talk about the ground of being, and we could talk about God in that language. The soul is the individual manifestation of our divine nature. So the difference between my individual soul and my contact with being, the ultimate divine essence. So while we are born, everybody, with each of the holy ideas available to the soul. In other words, we're not just 1/9 of the truth. There's some part of us that really has a connection to all of these 9 aspects, which you need to have balance, which is the divine, which is creation, all of reality. We're born with all of those ideas available. But one slant, one of the ideas, becomes innately more compelling. As I develop my personality, I begin to become fixated even on just my aspect of what God and truth and the holy idea is. I even begin to limit my understanding of being. And that holy idea of my particular point on the Enneagram, at some point, our point of view crystallizes around that point of view or that fixation, and that becomes my personality. So we begin to lose contact with essence, which is my essential aspect of divine creation. And consequently, by losing that in my own individual soul, I lose contact with great being. Do you see? So again, conceptually, this stuff is very, very dense. That statement there itself is just humongous. And Oscar Ichazo, really created an entire school in South America just to study these concepts. But rather than staying with this conceptually, let's look at how this begins to show up practically. You'll probably get that better. And then looking at how it manifests practically in your life, you'd be able to come back to this and you'd maybe more easily see the reality of it. So we're going to play tonight with 2 concepts. An aspect of the Enneagram I haven't talked about very much here, but they do talk about in introductory Enneagram courses. So probably a lot of you have heard about this notion called the trap of each of the 9 Nes Styles. And again, you could go back to that Excel spreadsheet that was sent to you on the first week, and you could look down the list there and find out what your trap is. Imagine like a Mobius strip where it's impossible to totally separate one aspect from the other. The trap and our holy idea become sort of locked together in my human incarnate experience. So sometimes the best way to get back to the concept or to the, awareness of my holy idea is by looking at the things in my personality in everyday life that trap me. And then when I look at what's wrong sometimes or where I'm addicted, it's ironically in this tool more easy for me to see the holy idea. So instead of hating myself for the trap and for the vice and for the addiction, I can actually begin to see it as sort of a wedge into awareness of the recovery of my holy idea. So here's what I did is I put together on one Enneagram chart, and you've got a copy of this, your trap for your type, which is in red there above your style, and then in green, your holy idea. So if you just dial around there, you can see what your trap is. So there's a correlation here between the trap and the holy idea. I'll use mine again as a starting point since I know it from the inside out. My trap is efficiency. Why? The trap, by the way, again, is not abstract. It's my behavior. It's just sort of the way I'm hardwired in my personality, to be efficient, to get things done, to get lots done. That's 3 energy. Why? Because when I go back to my passion as a 3, which is vanity, ego vanity, when I do my soul child work, I just find out that I am afraid. I'm a sick soul child, and I just didn't trust that the universe could run by itself. So I had to get in there and figure out it all depended on me. And I took that burden on myself, and I became an overdriven workaholic 3. And the trap of my personality is efficiency, which means as long as things are efficient, boy, I can't stand inefficiency. Get out of my way, because there's lots to do. So efficiency is not a bad thing, you see. None of those traps are bad things. All of them are good for every other type. But for your type, it's a trap. For my type, efficiency is a trap. And it's a trap because it separates me from the holy idea of divine will, that there is a larger divine will that organizes and is running the universe. And you know what? It doesn't need me. I can be part of it, but I'm not it. Now, that seems so obvious, but I think at the extreme of the 3 personality, it is a loss of connection with the notion that, to use my language, God's running the show, and therefore I can relax, and I can tolerate inefficiency in myself. I can even become more uninvolved and unengaged, or more connected to my work in a way that's less driven and healthier. So that would be a way in which we would dial around each of the 9 styles, and we'd look at our trap. And I sent you a handout, which we're going to refer to here for our reflection time, that talks about the correlation between the trap and the holy idea. So you'll be able to, during our break time here, to go and read that for yourself, and you'll see the connection between your trap, if you really know your type, and the holy idea, which we need to be reminded of, because that's sort of our North Star of salvation, really. Salvation from our addiction. So that's the first part of the teaching this evening. I'm going to focus on how we can look at where our broken behaviors can be an insight into or back to our divine holy idea. The second thing that I want to talk about are transformational practices. And I've been doing that so far in the course. I did it with the heart space. The first week we were together, the head space. And so tonight, to complete it, I want to talk about the transformational practices for the gut space, 8, 9, and 1, just so we've completed that. So again, remember this soul child concept, that we probably are we are not our personality. That's a manufactured self. That's a self that forgot essence. And when we swim upstream, remember that metaphor, to our heart point in our soul child self, we encounter this lost part, which, we don't blame ourselves for it. For whatever reason, circumstances made it very difficult for us to trust. And therefore, we sort of put on this armor in life of our personality, almost as a movement away from our soul child. So when we reconnect to our heart point, which remember we said is not easy, because sometimes when I first see it, I'm a little leery about going back to that type and trusting that that's really who I am in essence. But that is who I am in essence. So that's what the soul child work, that's why we call it healing work. And I've mentioned, and I'm just putting these here as resources because there's not time and just a short time together. But if you'd like 2 different authors that really talk about the spiritual practices for each type, in my estimation, these are 2 books that are classics. And then, just like I did in the other 2 nights, I made a little list of the general spiritual practices which are best fitted for the head, heart, or gut type. And again, I'm not going to go through those here in detail, but I've included them so that, to me, that would be, I've done another course after this, which is based entirely on spiritual practice. And here I'm just kind of touching briefly on it. I've also talked about the obstacles that can show up with each of our three types. Okay, so I'm fast forwarding because it's there really as a reference for you. But what I'd like to do again now is just take a look at three great masters that in this case come out of the Christian tradition, who wrote handbooks basically for spiritual seekers using some aspect of the Enneagram. And as I've mentioned before, there's Evagrius from the 4th century, Raymond Lull from the 13th, and Ignatius from the 16th century. So let's look at the gut spaces, the soul child of type 8. Now, I'm going to just for a second here read the handout that I sent you that contrasts the trap of the 8 with the holy idea of 8. And maybe you can see why then this 8 going to 2 for soul child makes sense. 8s are trapped by their misguided idea of justice. Again, justice is not a bad thing, but for 8s, it's a trap. They are overly sensitive to the issue of upholding their own rights to preserve their personal dignity and be respected by others. And they will create a lustful personality and a strong personality to do that. They tend to see injustice everywhere and attempt to keep tipping the scales of justice until they balance. As regards to what is unjust or wrong, they will determine that themselves. And when confronted by others, they will often refuse to listen. They preach their own idea of what is right and restructure situations and relationships to achieve their own goals, assuming others do the same. So that's the problem. The holy idea of compassion can release 8s, and you'll find compassion in spades in the type 2, okay, in that type of humility. That holy idea can release 8s from the trap of their own narrow definition of justice. The compassion of God reveals a different standard of justice, which often confounds our human measurements. The 8 can act compassionately when reminded that God makes the sun to shine on the bad and the good alike. By abandoning themselves to dealing with evil through divine way of compassion, 8s are set free of the penchant to be judge over others. There's no longer a need to cling to false overconfidence in knowing what is and isn't just. Instead, 8s can suspend judgment and trust a different kind of justice. For 8s, it is a profound revelation that God insists on a special attitude towards enemies, which expresses itself through mercy, forgiveness, nonviolence, and tolerance. So you can see the balancing act there when I use that Mobius strip between the trap of justice and the holy idea of compassion. So that's it for the 8. And this whole idea, which again, you could go to your Excel spreadsheet and find, of holy truth could be summed up in a question: how does remembering that truth exists in every being help me lessen my need to dominate others? So that kind of truth is an antidote to a false sense of justice. Okay. In the 4th century manual of Evagrius, he says 8s need to forgive others as quickly as you expect God to forgive you. And so the practice really for the 8 is to consistently go back to forgiveness to the point where we would say in modern language, if you have to confess to the shower curtain, do it. It's just good for 8s to do it. So no wonder that 12-step spirituality, most of which is about the power of surrender and forgiveness, is a great modern application of Evagrius for 8s today. Only a power greater than yourself can restore our sanity. You need to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of your own injustice and then make amends wherever possible. So That's a bit of working with that idea of the trap and the holy idea for type 8. Let's look at it for type 9, our next gut space type. So self-abasement is the trap for 9. Unconditional love is the holy idea. So listen to the description here. 9s are trapped by their idea of self-abasement. They think by being slothful, by not overly activating their own self-worth, they're doing something virtuous, but it's not true. Because lacking love for themselves and unaware of their true importance as persons, they think their energy has to come from somewhere outside of themselves. This is where the 9 goes to 3. And the 3, of course, at their best, self-actualizes. So the 9 needs to pick up that efficient waking up energy that the 3 has at its healthiest. The holy idea of unconditional love releases 9s from the trap of their self-abasement. They desperately need to feel within themselves the truth that they are a unique creation and a gift to the world. This need to be more than a belief needs to be a principle in action. So the 9's got to go to 3 to do it. To be effective in moving from indolence or sloth, the idea of unconditional love needs to be translated so that they see themselves as truly lovable because of who they are. So the 3 at their best tends to see that. The 9 has a blinder onto that. Only then do they love in an outgoing, active way. For the 9s, above all, it is true that unless they know they are lovable, they cannot give love. The idea of a divine, unconditional love calls them to see their unique contribution in the world. And once they find life within themselves, they reach for real union with others rather than the false sense of peace and withdrawal from life's activities. For the 9, conversion involves discerning the reality of unconditional love as directed to and within them. So, how does authentic love invite me to be vibrant and engaged with life? That becomes the question for the 9. And so Gandhi, a great example of 9 energy, be the change. You see, put it into action. Don't think about it. Be the change you want to see. Because the only thing we really have any control over is ourselves. That would be a good mantra for style 9. And Raymond Lull would say in the 13th century that the antidote to self-abasement is that when you are checking out, and the 9s check out a lot, if you can just begin to develop the awareness to say, wait a minute, in this moment when I'm checking out, what do I desire? And that's hard for a 9 because I want to desire whatever you want me to desire. When I can check in with that, I can move from doubt to engagement. So it means for the 9 being awake in the midst of a situation when, oh, there it is again. I'm just going to stand by the sidelines. I don't want the conflict. I'm just going to, let everybody else duke it out. No, I need to know where I stand. And then finally, type 1, okay, the last of the 3 so-called gut space types. So here we have the soul child of 7. So listen to the description of the trap of perfection for the 1. Again, working towards perfectionism is not bad for any other type, but for 1, man, is it a trap. And the holy idea is growth. Actually, almost a better sense of it in Greek is the notion of evolution. Everything is growing and changing. So the trap for 1s is their ideal of perfection, which becomes an obsession for them. Bothered by the smallest imperfection, they strive for an attainable ideal perfection. Nothing they do satisfies them, so they constantly find fault. Reality, of course, is not perfect, so they try even harder and become increasingly impatient. For them, what counts is the now. They are not process people. The holy idea of growth can release 1s from the trap of imperfection. And when they go to type 7, 7 is the more relaxed type, willing to let it flow as it's going to flow. It recognizes that the world is governed in an evolutionary, co-creative way. The entire creation of the universe is in the process of becoming. It's not perfect now. Okay. So for ones to abandon themselves to the divine design in things involves their accepting the Creator's way of seeing all things evolving in gradual steps. It means accepting one's creaturehood. And this can lead ones to see that it's okay to have loose ends in what happens, and that imperfection and mistakes are all part of becoming a whole person, a holy person. Question for them is, how can I discover the beauty in what is imperfect? Boy, there's a challenge. And Ignatius, who was either a 1 or an 8, but we know he was in the gut space, so he really got this from inside, had to struggle with what he calls the spiritual law of dissipative structures. So even as things are breaking down, they often will reorganize into something higher. Actually, that's a principle now of quantum mechanics and science. So the antidotes of criticism, because the ones are especially hypersensitive to criticism, is to locate where the tension is in your body and to keep your attention there, to let yourself breathe and release the tension in the body. This is a body space type. And ask themselves, where and with whom can you go to lighten up? So my friend Richard Rohr always says, if you love a 1, just go behind them once a day and tickle them. They hate it because they lose control. But they really need to lighten up. And he says, I've never known a 1 who knows how to tell a joke. Jokes are a waste of time. But the 1, when they go to 7, actually can see the humor in the universe. Maybe for the ones, the scriptural parable that can help is the prodigal son. You know, the oldest son, the 1, who says, this is not right, Dad. I have faithfully served you for years without receiving so much as a thank you note. And this brother of mine goes off and fritters away everything, and you throw him a party. Boy, talk about a 1 moment. And there would be something about that parable that might especially speak to the 1. And Ignatius talks about that parable as the perfect antidote to that kind of judgmental personality. Okay. So what I'd like to do before we present one last little piece this evening yet, which is going to be a weave into what we're going to do next week to bring everything together, is to have you go, to that handout that I sent to you with the traps and the holy ideas. And I would like for you to read through your Enneatype and see, as you read through that, holding in balance, not trap bad, holy idea good, but as you see the Mobius strip of that, see if you can in fact catch your addicted behavior in the trap and see where the holy idea maybe can be a little bit of liberation for you, a light that can lead you out of that addicted behavior into a more relaxed understanding of your essential soulful self. So that's all I'm going to ask everybody to do, is to really read through that. There's a lot there to chew on. To just make a note to yourself if there's any ahas. Aha, oh boy, I had never thought of that before. How true that is. Or if it's just not resonating, maybe that's an indication that you have another Ennea style that you need to be pursuing. Okay. So I want to make sure that we have enough time tonight. So it's about 1:45. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, if that's okay, and come back at 5 minutes before the hour. And then I'd like especially the 8, 9s, and 1s tonight to speak up first. And then I have one other really kind of important teaching I want to do tonight called the Enneagram of Harmony, which will take us into the week's work ahead and into our final week together. But right now, let's take about 10 minutes and just in silence, go to those pages and journal there as you feel drawn. Okay. Go ahead. So let's dive in here. Do we have a brave? I shouldn't say brave eight. All eights are brave by nature. That's the wonderful thing about eights. Somebody who would be willing to speak up if you are an eight, and we could talk a little bit about your experience with the trap and holy idea. Just unmute yourself there, your microphone and your video, and we can have a little conversation. I'm seeing some nines. Is it possible that we have no eights at all? That would be so unusual. Well, okay, I think I saw somebody who had a 9 with an 8 wing. Kimberly, are you there? Would you be willing to unmute?
I'm here, but I don't know which wing I really am. I guess I have little evidence of each side.
Okay, well, that's all right.
Since I've been meditating and I'm a contemplative prayer, I actually find that I have a lot of 3 elements that I've moved into over my life.
Okay.
So I don't really know what to say about my wings.
That's okay.
I can see myself in
Can you unmute your
either
video
one,
there?
in a sense.
Can you turn your video on, and then your face will come up there, and we'll be able to have a conversation, and we can all see you. There you go. Terrific. Good. Okay. Wonderful. So yeah. So in some ways it doesn't matter. I mean, that's just, you're in the gut space, and that tonight is what we wanted to deal with. So you've already given a little bit of a clue into it, that you're discovering that 3 part. You mentioned that, and that's maybe, you think, as a result of your contemplative practice?
Yes, I do. I do believe that is where it comes from, because as you work with the holy, as you mentioned, the divine, that unconditional love that you've talked about in your paper you sent out, really sends you to the 3 in terms of the compassion. I have that, you can see, can you see how I have that folded over?
There you go. Yeah, you're following. Well, that's your soul child. So that is what would happen. But thank you for saying that, because you see that that's not discovered in theory. I think what I really appreciate is that you said right off the top that out of your practice, out of your spiritual contemplative practice, you're feeling that connection. And that's really the point of the Enneagram that I'd like to emphasize here tonight. It's like that tinsmith story. We don't get it in theory. We get it by, surrendering in spiritual practice, and then we discover what's always been there. But the key to unlocking ourselves out of our prisons of our addictions is right inside of us. Yeah. And so that 9 self-abasement, which is so undermining to your personhood, is unlocked by discovering the power of that 3-ness. So
yes, and that self-abasement, I can really relate with what Sandra Maitre says about my life and the growth and what I was like as a child, and as usual, Richard Rohr is right on. They're both right on in those 2 pieces that you've sent out, and they are things I have discovered about myself in contemplative practice. So awesome. It's pretty great. It's because I didn't really ever see this. I never saw this, and to see it is to go, wow, that is so cool. Now I have it in writing.
You do. You have permission, and it names already what we know at some level, and that's the thing. And I'm not saying that the aha happens for everybody in the same way, but clearly for you, that 9-3 connection, you began to see it. But you saw it not because you were reading more books, but because you were in contemplative practice, allowing yourself to have that revealed to you. So that's great, Kimberly. Wonderful. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, well done. Good. Do we have a one who would be willing to unmute your video, and then we can spotlight you? There we go. Barb Morris.
Sure. I hope I do this perfectly.
Oh, I bet you would. I bet you do. Good. All right. Good. We'll take you off the hook.
Okay. I'm finding this all 3 weeks incredibly liberating and affirming. So thank you. The idea that growth is perfection is just, I feel a weight off my shoulders. Everything just makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Well, there it is. That's the soul child piece. And when we recognize it, there's a beautiful story. It's a Rumi story, who was a 1 on the Enneagram, and of course, a great teacher. And he used to give to his students who shared his addiction of perfectionism an acorn. And he would say, I want you to go out and meditate on the acorn, and to realize that you cannot say, you stupid acorn, if you were just smart, you'd be an oak tree. No, you would say, oh, you beautiful acorn, someday you have the potential of becoming an oak tree. And he found that for himself very liberating. So that's just another way where the 1-7 connection.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Lightens up. No, thank you. Well, that's good. And it's just another confirmation or affirmation that this soul child stuff is not just some sort of, it is the next step in Enneagram work. And I think it's often missing in most, and it's hard because at first, when we're introduced to the Enneagram, we're so just trying to understand our type. And then, but this is the next level. And I did want to give credit, and I think it's on the handout that I sent you. Patrick O'Leary and his wife are the 2 people, they live in Cleveland, Ohio. I think they're still alive. And they were the ones a lot of years ago who put together this particular handout that I sent to you.
Okay.
On the trap and holy idea. Patrick's a former Roman Catholic priest, and I've known his work for many, many years and always promoted it because he just really has a simple way of bringing together. So the soul child thing, we've talked about it for a few weeks, but I think it starts to lock in more clearly when we can contrast our behavior and addiction. You see, so that's what you did. I see another one there. Angela, is that, did you want to speak up there, or is that?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Barb said. I mean, I'm a hardcore 1, and all of this has been so spot on, and it's really just so interesting for me to start to understand that all the times that I get frustrated with the lack of perfection around me is really a chance to kind of flip that on its head, look at that holy idea of, you know, that the universe is working on becoming. It's all a process. I don't tend to have the patience for the process and waiting and just appreciating the beauty of what's there. Nobody is perfect. The world is not perfect. It never will be perfect. So continuing to strive for that and get angry or just frustrated with every little thing that's not perfect is going to get me nowhere. And so trying to flip that and really see the beauty in the imperfection, and that we all share that in different ways. I mean, even just, you know, yeah, not even just my Ennea types here, but just seeing others, and that we all have our strong points and our weaknesses. And wow, this is just opening up so much.
Thank you. No, you got it spot on. One of my favorite ones, I don't know if anybody here's old enough to remember Irma Bombeck years ago. She was a writer. She had a column syndicated in newspapers around the country for about 20 years. And she was an Enneagram aficionado, and she was a 1 on the Enneagram. And I remember one time visiting with her at her home in Phoenix, and she says, you know what 1s have to do? They have to fall in love with perfect messes. My children are a perfect mess. My yard is a perfect mess. My life's a perfect mess. But she says, you got to put the adjective perfect before it so that you can realize that the two somehow can fit together. And I thought that was always a great way of phrasing it. So good. Thank you. Well done. Well done. Very good. All right. Well, I said it was one other thing that I wanted to make sure tonight that I covered a little bit of it, because next week we can really spend the entire time on it. So let me move ahead here to this last little part. And I just need to introduce it a bit tonight. And I don't want to explode your heads. It's late at night, but just so that you've heard it. And so that I can use that next week. I can build on that, and we can dive into this last piece that I think really pulls all of these concepts together. And that's what's sometimes called the Enneagram of Harmony. Great book by Adele and Doug Calhoun. This comes from it was a surprise to me. It came from an unlikely source, because I think their backgrounds, the 4 authors here actually, come from an evangelical Christian background, which typically I don't find are necessarily attracted to the Enneagram. But, you know, to get us out of our judgments, these people really saw this as a powerful way to help their church communities grow. So their book here, Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram, is just where I'm drawing this from. And basically, and again, it's there in the earlier traditions, but I think they put it together in a marvelous way. There's the 3 centers of body, heart, and head. And we often think of them as sort of separate entities. And we forget in our Enneagram work that we need all 3. You know, we're not balanced unless we access all 3 centers of knowing, centers of intelligence. And the divine harmonizing is how we bring our particular enneatype into the total rhythm of the divine. So when we remember our essence, our soul child, that's often one step towards doing that, because often that takes us out of our home space and we begin to see the larger connection through our lines and arrows and connections. But this is kind of the aha, and maybe some of you heard this. If you haven't, I think it's brilliant. We very often in introductory work talk about the center triad, the 3, 6, and 9, as the equilateral triangle on the Enneagram, as having particular prominence. And of course, the 3, 6, and 9 are the center of the heart, head, and gut space. But really, in a way, that would, if that's true, the Enneagram is about total balance, then it couldn't be true that 3, 6s, and 9s have some sort of edge over the other types. So in the harmony triads, what you find out is there are actually 3 equilateral triangles. There is the 3, 6, and 9. And then there's the 1, 4, 7, which, and then there's the 8, 2, and 5. So you can just see where your Ennea style is and see where the other 2 types are that you associate with on your so-called Enneagram of Harmony. This is really important because, for example, for years, I remember people taking Enneagram tests and coming out equally high as type 7 and type 4. And I would scratch my head and think, how can that be? 7 and 4, totally unrelated. 7 over there in the head space, 4 over here in the heart space, no connection on the lines between them. Well, here's the connection. Here's the connection. 7, 4, and 1, in fact, have a connection, as do 8, 2, and 5. So you can just sort of see where your harmony triad is as a starting point, just to notice it. And then what we do with this is we, in terms of spiritual practice, we bring a question, we bring a problem in life, we bring, Parker Palmer says, a tragic gap, someplace in life where life's not working. My gosh, we could bring COVID, we could bring Ukraine and Russia. There's just so many things we could bring. And we often try to approach that problem, that issue, that question, from inside of our perspective, if we're heart, head, or gut space. So if I'm a heart space person, I often will look at a problem and I'll think, how do I feel about it? What's my EQ, my emotional quotient, compared to the IQ in the headspace, compared to the GQ, the gut quotient. But you see, I'm never going to find the answer or the solution to my dilemma just within my home space, just as I need to travel outside my home space to find my soul child. In the Enneagram of Harmony, what I need to do is bring my question to all three centers. And by doing that, I poke at that question or that dilemma from three very different points of view, and I access three very different kinds of intelligence, if you're following me. So a courageous question might be in the heart space: how does growth show up when faced with failure? In the head space, what can fear and anxiety, why can fear and anxiety motivate healthy choices? And in the gut space, what does resilience look like when faced with a crisis? So you have three sort of overarching meta questions that would show up if your home base is in the heart, head, or gut. Okay, just kind of stick with it here. Now, what starts to happen here, and this is what next week I hope I can really put together for you, is that you have to move in a clockwise direction. It's like the Enneagram on the outer edge of the Enneagram. You can't go counterclockwise, you go clockwise. So the heart has to move to the head with its question. Then moving it out of the subjective heart into the more objective head, then it can move the question to the body. It can embody it in the gut space and then bring the question back to the heart, to the home space. And so it is with each of our three places. We start with our home space, and then we learn in spiritual practice how to take our question for spiritual discernment out of our space to the other two centers of intelligence. Now, how does that show up practically? Well, for the two, love, which is an essential quality of two, that's one of the essential characteristics or qualities of two, the ability to love. When it goes into contemplation, it doesn't just stay with the subjective feeling of love, it makes a decision. It can discern this love is worth keeping, that one is really not love. The three recognizes by moving to its soul space that effective loyalty, when a three can move out of its threeness to sixness, that's how it brings harmony to the world. The three wants harmony in its relationships, but it has to move out of the heart space to do that. And the creative four, the naturally creative four, can really deepen in true, authentic deepening into real renewal instead of staying stuck in its own subjective feeling about creativity. So the same thing would be true in the headspace. True joy, the gift of the seven, deeply heals, doesn't stay on the surface. The faithfulness of the six, which is so natural to the six, produces real harmony, goes to the nine. The wisdom of the five doesn't stay just stuck in the head, but it moves into actual expressions of love. And in the gut space, the eight strength, so natural, isn't just this buckshot strength that rolls over everybody, but it embraces reality. And the peacemaker of the nine doesn't just want to have peace at no cost, but really brings its peacemaking into teamwork. And the goodness of one, that desire to get things right and good, creates joy and not constipation, not uptightness. So what begins to happen in the Enneagram of Harmony is we take our essential goodness, we look at our soul child, which enlightens what our real essential holy idea is. And then we begin to put all three centers of intelligence together. That's a lot of theory for tonight. And I don't want you to, as I say, get locked into the head tonight. But I would like you to, let's see. There we go. To, if you would like, in the week ahead, I'm going to give you a few ideas of how you could work with this. The first one might be to go back to that story of the tinsmith. Maybe I should send that story to you. I'll try to do that. Remember to do that tomorrow and see if Matt can get that off to you. Go back. The story is often a very powerful metaphor to unlocking something more than the intellectual concept is. So maybe the tinsmith story speaks to you, maybe, about spiritual practice. And when 5 times a day he prayed, he got his head below his heart and into his body. And so he was able to see beyond, the physical, his way that he could make a key and be released from his jail. That's a metaphor for the Enneagram. You could journal about any insights that arise in you from that Enneagram trap and holy idea that was sent to you by O'Leary's definitions there, that handout that we sent you. There's a lot there. Don't just sort of gloss over that. That's a real way of, in practice, for example, noticing, oh, there I am again in my trap of efficiency. Can I just sort of loosen the grip of that by remembering the holy idea that God's in control? I remember having an 8 friend who was a justice on the Oregon court, and he took our course and he said, oh, I get it. He says, it's an 8. He says, you don't kill all the small bastards. You save the big cannon for the biggest SOBs. I said, well, yeah, I guess that's a better way of seeing justice. You're not just slamming at everything. You're holding that energy back and really focusing it when justice needs to be served. So that was a funny way of seeing it, but it was a good 8 way of seeing it. And then maybe third, and this maybe would be my final or my favorite idea, if you'd like to try it, to identify and bring here next week. And maybe all of you, in spite of, even if you did 1 and 2, you could try to do this next week. And then bring the question literally in writing next week. Identify one soulful question that you would like to consider through working through the 3 centers of intelligence. This is going to be a place next week where I hope that I can leave you with a spiritual practice ready for the rest of your lives. And it's not something that's meant to replace a spiritual practice you're doing already. It can complement your own spiritual practice of contemplation or whatever you're doing. But it's a way for me, when I'm just noticing something's not working, oh, there I am again. I'm feeling really revved up inside because of this issue. If I can just pause, take a deep breath, ask my question, what's not working here? Why is he so inefficient in my definition of it? It helps me pause with that and take that question over to my soul child 6. Say, wait a minute, there's less heat around that question at type 6. In type 6, I learn my soul child of faithfulness to this person, no matter what, to appreciate their gift. That's enough. And then I bring that to the gut space. and I say, how could I breathe with that insight and get it into my body and bring it back to my heart so that instead of being aggravated with that inefficiency, I can in fact feel, truly feel at peace in spite of the inefficiency, because the world's not perfect. So it's just sort of a starting point that I could recommend to you, where you could begin to work with this Enneagram of Harmony. And again, I've just sort of introduced it a bit this evening, but next week we'll spend our entire time with that concept. So I'm going to stop there, and we've got a few minutes yet. So I'd like to see, you've been getting a lot of lessons and teaching here. If there's some other questions, anybody's question here can be really helpful, because maybe it's somebody else's question. We're throwing lots of vocabulary here. Just unmute your video, and then we'll see you, and you'll float to the top there of the screen of our gallery, and then unmute your audio and ask your question.
Hi, this is
Hi.
Karen. Could you go over what the difference is between the trap and the fixation?
Yeah, actually, thank you. They're pretty related, actually. So what happens is something in life doesn't feel safe to me. Again, I'll just use my example. As a little 3, my world did not feel safe. It did not feel like a world that I could trust. My father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My mother expected me to be her father and her husband energetically to make the family work. So I had to, at an early point in life, roll up my sleeves and become Richard the efficient one, solve the family problems. Now, that was a way of surviving. I got my mother's love that way, but it was a burden I began to carry. And what I began to forget when I acted out of that was, wait a minute, it couldn't depend on me. How ridiculous that a child could feel that the world and the family health would depend upon their performance. So as I got divorced from my soul child 6, as I forgot that fact that God was in control, I began to develop this personality, which was an addictive personality, that if I could just keep working harder and harder and harder, I could fix any situation and everybody would be pleased with me. The trap is just the behavior that expresses that addictive inclination. The trap of efficiency names it. 100 times a day, I can think of when that little bell goes off in me. I'm juggling 19 things at once. I'm really great at multitasking. But really, you know, multitasking is not ultimately a way of being present to any one thing. I can get more done than anybody else. But that doesn't mean that I'm getting things done in depth. Unless I stop, recognize that, take a deep breath. I have to do that before I teach a class. I put a lot of work into these classes. And the hour before, I have to let go of it all. And I have to go into a different place and say, wait a minute, this is about these people. This is about, I have to go inside of myself and know the truth of this in here, which is very inefficient. And then try to come here and not spill my guts, but just to say, you know, this is where I'm wrestling with this. So for you, you're not sure 6 with a 5 or 4 with a 3 or 5. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. So all over the place there, though. Well, so,
which is actually a question that I was so certain when I first heard about the Enneagram way back in my 20s that I was a 4. And I just kind of clung to that, you know. But given that we have to kind of go around the whole wheel, it seems to me, or at least that's my understanding, that we don't want to get too fixated on just being that type in order to be whole. As I've aged, I think, oh, maybe I'm just in that 6 slot now, you know, where worry and security and things like that start to have more, all right, I'm more concerned about things as I became a parent, so my question is, you know, do you kind of expect that you're going to go through, you know, just the different points as you grow and change anyway?
In the sense that's true in that as we grow, and like I say, we go from our home base to our soul child, we begin to discover these connections. We discover our other wings, but not in the sense, if you buy the theory, and I do, that we are who we are, that the essential wound that happens to us, which creates our personality, is something we carry with us for a lifetime. And I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I teach a lot of classes. Have we talked before? And I've said that when you speak, I think I hear the verbs that you use are 6 verbs. Have I said that to you in the past? Okay, because you just did it again. I mean, and I'm hoping that's a positive feedback for you. That what I hear, and you see, that could make your exploration make sense, because if 6 is home base, you would have a 5 wing. Okay, you would have a connection to 3. That 639 is very, very powerful. But the piece where all of your discovery is going to come is going to be at 9.
At 9, yeah, which is really a surprise.
It's going to be a surprise. And at first, remember, when we first discover our soul child, in fact, we can actually be sort of put off by, we read about 9, you know, how is that a place of hell for me? But remember, the high point of 9 is this essential belief that the world is completely safe and trustworthy. Wow. Boy, that was not acceptable to the 6. No way, no how. So the 6 goes into overdrive, sort of rebels against that, and creates, and actually backslides to 3, works harder and harder and harder to make things feel safe and so forth. So I think maybe that could be a confirmation to you. So I would just keep exploring 9, the soul child 9.
Thank you.
We got time for one other quick question or insight. Somebody like to jump in?
I just wanted to quickly say thank you about the 3 and the 7 connection, because I mean, 4 and 7, I couldn't decide what I was. And now I see, you know, why it was difficult for me to figure that out.
Yeah, good. You've got that beautiful viola back there. So yeah, 471, huh? So man, that's a whole new playground to play with, because the interrelationship of those 3 sides, that's the part of the Enneagram of Harmony I hope will be helpful to all of us. And as I say, next week, when I try to sort of pull this all together, not just the theory of it, but hopefully the practice of it for you. The practice of the coming attraction for next week is the art of asking a sacred question, which normally we do out of our small 1/9 perspective of reality. But to open up that practice and to begin to vet our sacred question through the head, heart, and gut space, to move around the dial, that's going to be a spiritual practice that I think can save you a lot of grief in life. It's going to help all of us get out of our traps when we're sort of in our addictive, trapped place. Okay. Good. All right, wonderful. Well, boy, the hour and a half goes so fast. I just always enjoy it. I hope you can come next week. I'll share a few more things with you in advance about the Enneagram of Harmony, and I will try tomorrow to get the Tinsmith story written out for you, so that if you'd like to go back to, it's a great story to use. I'll tell you, you can use it if any of you are involved in ministry and you ever have to give sermons. The Tinsmith story itself is a perfect sermon. So there you go. All right. God bless everybody. Take care. Bye-bye now.